Thank you very much. It's always a great pleasure to come to Seattle, a city that I first entered in 1965, having driven from Vancouver, where I was at the time. And it must have been 64. Maybe it was even, yeah, it was 64. I was living in Vancouver. I was teaching at UBC. I was teaching on the lowest rung of the academic ladder. So I was teaching grammar to engineering students. At 8:30 in the morning in a Quonset hut left over from World War II. And we were all asleep, so it was okay. And I was supposed to be teaching them grammar, so I got them to read Kafka's Parables, because those contain problems, and engineers like solving problems. Also, they were very short. So I got them to read those, and then I got them to write their own parables with problems in them, which they also like doing. And then we could talk about the grammar that they had used in writing their parables. So I drove down from Vancouver with my boyfriend of the time, and the car broke down. So my first memory of Seattle was being towed into it is indelibly engraved upon my memory. It's changed a lot since those days. I have to say it was a bit shabby then. You know, it's really come up in the world. And one of the symptoms of that coming up in the world is the extremely active book culture that it now has. So I'm always happy to visit it and to track its transformations. I was last here in 2009 when we were launching the Year of the Flood. And I'm just going to reprise that a little bit for you. It's the second book in the MaddAddam series, and it features the God's Gardeners, a green religious cult who cultivate vegetables and bees on rooftops in slums, while the rest of the world is increasingly controlled by giant corporations who have their own security force called the Corpse Corps. And the God's Gardeners already knew back in 2009 what you have all just learned from reading the newspapers. Namely, the internet leaks like a sieve. And people can spy on you through it. You didn't know that, did you? So they don't use it. They don't use any cell phones or computers, because, as they rightfully say, if you can see it, it can see you. So they, on the other hand, use slates and chalk, because they're very suspicious of anything that might exist in the form of evidence. They're already a bit, I won't say paranoid, because everything that they fear turns out to be true. That's not paranoia. Anyway, they have their own saints and feast days. They attempt to combine religion, science, and nature with varying results. So they have their own saints, including Saint Al Gore, Saint Robert Burns, because of those mice, and people like Saint Jane Goodall. And I think that's appropriate. So anybody who has been saintly in that area, it's like other saints. You don't have to have been saintly in all areas, just that one. And they also have some feast days dedicated to various areas of plant and animal life. And this hymn is the hymn for Mole Day, which is the festival of underground life. And it is a children's festival because the things that live underground are, as a rule, quite small. All of the information in it is factually true. It's called We Praise the Tiny Perfect Moles. I love singing in churches. We praise the tiny perfect moles that garden underground, the ant, the worm, the nematode, wherever they are found. They live their whole lives in the dark, unseen by human sight. The earth is like the air to them, their day is like our night. They turn the soil and till it, they make the plants to thrive. The earth would be a desert if they were not alive. Boom, 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 boom. The little carrion beetles that seek unlikely places return our husks to elements and tidy up our spaces. And so for God's small creatures beneath the field and wood, let us today give joyful thanks, for God has found them good. Let us today give joyful thanks, for God has found them. So now we're going to turn to MaddAddam. And I thought you might like to hear something about the epic saga of the cover design. You may have noticed something on the internet called cover flip, in which a somewhat disgruntled female author challenged her blog readers to take well-known books and switch the gender, and then put on the kind of cover that they thought a publisher would put on if the gender were different, such as if William Faulkner were Wilhelmina Faulkner, or if Alice Munro were Alphonse Munro. Would the cover be different? And the results are quite funny, and you should have a look. So On the Road, Jack Kerouac gets kind of a grainy, stern male cover, but Jacqueline Kerouac gets a red convertible. Blonde in sunglasses, waving at you very happily. So the first cover that I was sent by my publishers for this book had a chaste spray of delicate white flowers upon it. I wrote back and I said that this was not indicative of the contents of the book. Essentially, this book was about cannibalism and evisceration, and anybody presented with just a chaste spray of delicate white flowers, which, as one of my relatives rather cruelly remarked, made it look as if someone was trying to make panty liners look hip. Was going to irritate a lot of the readers when they, if they either knew what might be in it already, or if they thought it was what they were getting was going to be the English country woman's diary. So they protested, but they then presented me with another cover. I said, I think you need to put an egg on it. So they did put an egg on it, and it wasn't a nest like this cover, but the egg and the nest were surrounded by a wreath of flowers. So this time the flowers were dead. So they had understood the dead part. but the cover was black, and the writing was done in twigs, twiggy writing. So when I see twiggy writing, I don't know about you, but when I see twiggy writing, I think of gnomes, fairies, and elves. So I said, there are no gnomes, fairies, and elves in this book. Let's get rid of the twiggy writing. So we did get rid of it, and we ended up with a very good-looking, I think, nest without any dead flowers, and we changed the colors so that they were not black, and there is no twiggy writing. But this is what you have to do, fellow and future authors. You have to stand firm, stand your ground, hold the line. So that's a little bit about the outside of the book. And now I'll talk a bit about the inside. So this is the third one in the MaddAddam trilogy, which began with Oryx and Crake and continued with the Year of the Flood. Those two books take place in parallel time. So they're like the Victorian novel, which would have meanwhile chapters. So each of them is the meanwhile chapter of the other one. But you know when you get meanwhile chapters following two different stories, that if those two stories do not meet up at the end, you will be very annoyed as a reader. So MaddAddam is where they meet up. Those two stories, which end at approximately the same time, meet up like this, and then the third one, which is MaddAddam, takes off from there and tells us what happens next. It also tells quite a lot of the story of Zeb, who is a character in Year of the Flood, and we hear more about him throughout this book. So I'm going to, there are three main narrative voices in the book. One of them is Zeb himself telling his own story, which he tells to a character called Toby. The second voice is that of Toby, and the third voice is that of the story that Toby tells, somewhat edited and rearranged, to a group of people known as the Crakers. The Crakers have been genetically engineered to avoid a lot of the problems that bedevil us. And because they're non-aggressive, their creator then felt he had to get rid of us because these people would not have stood much of a chance faced with us. So they don't have any need for clothing, so they don't wear any. They have built-in sunblock, a good thing. They have built-in insect repellent, a better thing. And they have extra soles on their feet. In addition to that, they eat grass and leaves, so they don't even have to have agriculture, and they're quite averse to any form of meat eating, so they think that the human beings, our species, that they're able to observe are really, really weird in so many ways. They purr to self-heal. I got some pushback on that when I first proposed it in Oryx and Crake, but science is since bearing me out, because we are now told that one of the reasons cats purr is to self-heal, and we're also told that should you have a migraine headache, you should put a purring cat on your head. Don't try this at home unless you have a very good relationship with your cat. It doesn't tell us how to keep the cat on, so you probably can't go to work this way, but this is an entrepreneurial city, so I pose this as a little entrepreneurial niche for someone to devise a cat hat. Keep the hat on with the cat in it. So those are some of their features, but one of the very, very best features that they have is that they will never suffer from romantic agony. They will never write the sonnets of Shakespeare. They will never feel rejected because, unlike ourselves, they mate seasonally. And when they come into season, parts of them turn blue so that there is no question of confusion or mistake or any of those kinds of things that might happen amongst us, and about which we, never mind. Anyway, that problem has been done away with, and even more so, they mate in groups, so that there is not any question of paternity, which doesn't interest them anyway, because they don't have any stuff or territory, so they don't need to inherit things. They are ceremonial about it, like penguins. The male penguin presents the female penguin with a stone, and if that is accepted, then it's a go. So they don't use stones, they use bouquets of flowers. They don't use diamond rings. They do a bit of singing and some signaling. And this is quite fully described, in case you're interested in it. Don't try this at home either. So I'm going to read a section in which Toby and Zeb are talking, and then I'm going to read a section in which Toby is attempting to fulfill the Craker's curiosity about Zeb. The day has been stifling. Even the afternoon thunderstorm hasn't cleared away the humidity. Under normal conditions, but what is normal, lust should have been drained of its supercharge by this weather, muffled as if under a damp mattress. She and Zeb should have been limp, enervated, exhausted, but instead they'd snuck away from the others even earlier than usual, slippery with longing, every pore avid, every capillary suffused, and thrashed around like newts in a puddle. Now it's deep twilight. Purple darkness wells up from the earth, bats flit past like leathery butterflies, night flowers open, musking the air. They're sitting outside in the kitchen garden for the evening breeze, what there is of it. Their fingers are loosely entwined. Toby can feel still a small current of electricity moving between them. Tiny iridescent moths are shimmering around their heads. What do we smell like to them, she wonders? Like mushrooms? Like crushed petals? Like dew? Help me out here, says Toby. I need more to go on for the Crakers. They're insatiable on the subject of you. Like what? You're their hero. They want your life story, your miraculous origins, your supernatural deeds, your favorite recipes. You're like royalty to them. Why me, says Zeb. I thought Crake did away with all that. They aren't supposed to be interested. Well, they are. They're obsessed with you. You're their rock star. Lord, fuck a dog. Can't you just make up some piece of crap? They cross-examine like lawyers, says Toby. At the very least, I need the basics, the raw material. Does she want to know about Zeb for the sake of the Crakers or for herself? Both, but mostly for herself. I'm an open book, says Zeb. Don't be evasive, Zeb sighs. I hate going back to all that. I had to live it. I don't like reliving it. Who cares? I do, says Toby. And so do you, she thinks. You still do care. I'm listening. Persistent, aren't you? I've got all night. So, you were born? Yeah, admitted. Another sigh. Okay. First, you need to understand. We got the wrong mothers. Wrong how, she says to the face she can barely see, a plane of cheekbone, a shadow, a glint of eye. The story of the birth of Zeb. I have put on the red hat of snowman. I have eaten the fish. I have listened to the shiny thing. Now I will tell you the story of the birth of Zeb. You don't have to sing. Zeb did not come from Crake, not like snowman, and he wasn't made by Oryx, not like rabbits. He was born the same way you are born. He grew in a bone cave, just like you, and came out through a bone tunnel, just like you. Because underneath our clothing skins, we are the same as you, almost the same. No, we do not turn blue, though we might smell blue sometimes, but our bone cave is the same. I don't think we need to discuss blue penises right now. I know they are bigger. Thank you for pointing that out. Yes, we do have breasts. The women do. Yes, 2. Yes, on the front. No, I will not show them to you right now. Because this story is not about breasts. This story is about Zeb. A very long time ago, in the days of the chaos, before Crake cleared it all away, Zeb lived in the bone cave of his mother, and Oryx took care of him there as she takes care of all those who live in the bone caves. And then he traveled into this world through the bone tunnel, and then he was a baby, and then he grew. And he had an older brother whose name was Adam. But Adam's mother was not the same mother as the mother of Zeb. Because when Adam was very young, Adam's mother ran away from Adam's father. Running away means she went very quickly to a different place, though she may not have done any running as such. Perhaps she walked or drove so Adam never saw her anymore. Yes, I'm sure it was sad for him, because she wanted to mate with more than one male, not only with Zeb's father, or that is what Zeb's father told him. Yes, it was a good thing to want, and she would have been happy if she could be living with you. She could mate with 4 males at once, like you. She would be very happy then. But Zeb's father did not see it that way. Because he had done a thing with her called marriage, and with marriage, there was supposed to be only 1 male for each female and 1 female for each male. Although sometimes there were more, but there were not supposed to be, because it was the chaos. It was a thing of the chaos. That is why you can't understand it. Marriage is gone now. Crake cleared it away because he thought it was stupid. Stupid means things Crake didn't like. There were a lot of things Crake thought were stupid. Yes, good, kind Crake. I will stop telling this story if you sing, because it makes me forget what I am telling. Thank you. So then Adam's father found a new woman to have marriage with, and Zeb was born. Now little Adam was not lonely because he had a brother, and Adam and Zeb helped each other, but Zeb's father was sometimes hurtful to them. I don't know why. He thought pain was good for children. No, he was not as bad as the 2 bad men who were hurtful to Amanda, but he was not a kind person. I don't know why some people then were not kind. It was a thing of the chaos. And Zeb's mother was often taking a nap or doing other things that interested her. She was not very interested in small children. And she said, "You will be the death of me." Death of me is hard to explain. It meant she was displeased with the things they were doing. No, Zeb did not kill his mother. Death of me is just a thing she said. She said it a lot. Why did she say it if it wasn't true? It was, those people talked that way. It wasn't true or not true. It was in between. It was a way of telling about a feeling you might have. It was a manner of speaking. A manner of speaking means, you're right, Zeb's mother was not a kind person either. Sometimes she helped Zeb's father lock Zeb up in a closet. Lock up means, closet means, it was a very small room and it was dark in there and Zeb couldn't get out. Or they thought he couldn't get out. But soon Zeb learned a lot about opening closed doors. No, his mother couldn't sing. Not like your mothers, and your fathers, and you. But Zeb could sing. That is one of the things he did when he was locked inside the closet. He sang. Now we can do questions and answers. You do the questions. I do the answers. We've got 2 microphones, one here and one here. If you don't want to do questions and answers, we could do something else. Here comes one.
You were pretty adamant that Handmaid's Tale was not science fiction, and I had a hard time convincing some of my students that that was so. I agree with you. This clearly is science fiction, or do you agree with that?
Okay, so there's 2 different kinds of stories under this general banner. You could say, you could have a great big banner and we could call it Wonder Tales, and we could have vampires, zombies, ghost stories, sort of in one division, and gnomes. We could have dragons, hobbits, things like that. Then we could have 2 lineages of SF, and one lineage would begin with Jules Verne, writing about things he thought would really come true pretty soon, like submarines. And the other lineage, I would say, began with H.G. Wells, or some people might say Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, but let's say H.G. Wells, because I think Mary Shelley really thought that there was going to be something to galvanism, that could really happen. But I doubt that H.G. Wells thought that Martians were going to arrive in giant tin cans anytime soon, or that anybody was going to make a time machine, really. So let's call him lineage number 2. And lineage number 1 led to books like Zemyatin's We, part of it, but certainly Brave New World, and absolutely 1984. So these were books about things on this planet that either were happening or that people were working on making happen on this planet, if not in our lifetime, then sometime soon. And 1984 was really just 1948 backwards, so it was the Soviet Union under different names. And then the other lineage, the H.G. Wells one, led to Star Wars and Galaxy Far, Far Away and in Another Time, spaceships, that sort of not on this planet, somewhere else. We can't go there yet. And wormholes in space and Star Trek, Beam Me Up, Scotty, and and such. Not that I'm not very fond of it. I just can't write it. So I would call the Jules Verne kind, I would call that speculative fiction. And I would call the other kind science fiction, and the reason for that is truth in labeling. Because if it says science fiction on the front, I want there to be spaceships, time travel, other dimensions, and galaxies far, far away and in another time. I like to feel that that is what I'm going to get. And skin-tight clothing, we know that that's we know that people wear that in outer space a lot. Why go to other planets unless they're wearing that? So I did grow up on, Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers and that kind of stuff. The golden age of bug-eyed monsters, that is well known to me. So that, and when I open a book and it says science fiction and I don't get those things in it, I'm quite annoyed. Just as if I bought a box of Cheerios and there were not any Cheerios in it, I would be annoyed. So it's like that. It is not a discriminatory kind of thing. It is just a question of there being two kinds of this fiction, and having grown up amongst the biologists, I was never allowed to call a tree just a tree. I had to know what kind of tree.
Well,
it's very specific.
I found MaddAddam to be more like the Old Testament than Star Wars.
It's more like the Old Testament because people die. Like, lots of people die. Okay, so I just throw this into the mixing pot. The mortality rate after European contact with North, Middle, and South America was 95%. Not because of the war, it was because of the diseases to which people here had no immunity. I do have a little library devoted to plagues. So I've got lots of information on on that, but also the great mortality, which we now call the Black Death. That was transformative in European history, but the mortality rate was tops 50%. So if you can imagine what 50% does, just think of what 95% did. And it turns out that we, the human race, have been through a bottleneck before. The deep geneticists tell us that we were reduced to a mere nub a couple of times, actually, and that we made it through those events, but we had expanded, and then along came another ice age, and we were really severely contracted. And that's probably what happened to the Neanderthals too. So you can get rid of all that guilt you felt because you thought it was us what did them in. It probably was not. So that's all I have to say about that. So I didn't put anything into, it's like The Handmaid's Tale, I put nothing into these books for which did not already exist, for which people were not already doing the science, and some of the things that were theoretical in Oryx and Crake have now been done, by the way, and for which we don't have either the technology or experiments already in progress. We have, by the way, now succeeded in making viruses in a test tube. One of the guys who made them, I think the first one was the polio virus, and they said to the man who did that, "Why did you do that?" Meaning, why did you do such a dangerous thing? But being a bio-geek, he said, because it's a really simple virus to make, and next time I'll make a more complex one.
Well, thank you for a wonderfully layered book.
Thank you.
Hi. So throughout the MaddAddam trilogy, there are multiple narrators, as clearly you know. And I was
Well, I hope so.
I was curious if you had a favorite narrator that you wrote as you were writing that character, and if so, why?
Did I have a favorite narrator that I wrote, and if so, why? I don't do favorites very well at all, in any way. So the kids used to drive me crazy by saying things like, "What's your favorite color?" And out of desperation, you finally just make something up. And the worst one was, "Which of my friends do you like the best?" You would go around the block not to answer that, but when you did, they would say, "What's wrong with the others?" So it is like that. If you name a favorite, they're going to say, "What's wrong with the others?" They're all lots of fun. The whole of Oryx and Crake is narrated by Jimmy, as you know, and it's a male voice throughout. And one of the reasons I did that was that I was so tired of people saying, why are all your narrators female, which they weren't before that anyway, but there wasn't one whole book that was entirely a male voice. So I did it in a male voice throughout, and then they said immediately, "Why did you do it? What's wrong with women? Why couldn't you?" So it is like that. Whatever you do, people are going to say, "What's wrong with the other thing?" So yes, I would say writing in a male voice gives you, I would have said once that it gave you more room for inventive swearing, but I don't think that's true in today's world anymore. Do you think it is true or not true?
I would agree with you that it's not necessarily true anymore.
Yeah, so it's now become more kind of an individual creativity thing.
I would agree, yes. Thank you.
I recently had the pleasure of reading your collected stories called The Tent, and was particularly struck by the story of the same name, and I would love to hear what inspired you to write that story.
Which story was that?
The tent itself.
Yeah. Oh, the tent story.
Yes.
Okay, I'm pretty simple-minded. I spent a lot of the time when I was young in tents.
I do too. That's why I liked it.
So in tents in basically bear country. And why was I doing that? Because we were living up north, and my dad was a forest entomologist, and he was also a person who we would live in tents while he was building the woodshed. And then when the woodshed was done, we would move into it, and we would live in the woodshed while he built a larger house. So I grew up also playing with edge tools, but yeah, so partly that, and it's just, it's a very flimsy structure that separates the inside from the outside, and it is a lot like paper. So I think people who write generally wonder what their structures are made of. Are they made of words? Are they made of whatever the words are put on? And why are we creating these structures made of words anyway? You know, to what end? Is it protective? Is it? We're always wondering that.
Thank you.
So I have a question about regarding A Handmaid's Tale. So in this country, religiosity is dropping pretty sharply. Among people born since 1981, I've read in a Pew survey that only half of them are absolutely certain God exists, whereas those born before 1928, 71% of them are absolutely certain. And this trend is true of all indicators of religiosity. As the author of Handmaid's Tale, do you see this as a positive or a negative thing?
I don't see it as either one, because I don't see belief in a deity as necessarily being positive or negative. What I was interested in The Handmaid's Tale was the use of religion to control people. which has been done many times throughout history and is being done right now at on various places on the planet. So a religious belief can either be a comfort and an encourager and a factor for social cohesion, or it can be an oppressive tool employed to differentiate between heretics and true believers, and basically butcher the ones who aren't included in the magic circle. So that was my interest. I'm not interested in personal beliefs, except as those personal beliefs translate into certain kinds of political behavior. And fundamentalism around the world, not just in this country, but any kind of fundamentalism is basically a political tool.
Thank you.
Hi. First off, I wanted to say what a pleasure it is to hear you speak. I heard you speak a few years ago at Cornell University, and after that decided to start reading your books, so always a pleasure.
Well, I'm glad it wasn't the other way around.
And I guess my question was, as an author, because a number of times I've read your books, and they've started like conversations for me, and I start thinking and always want to speak back. So I'm wondering, as an author, do you consider your writing kind of like a conversation with the readers? How much is it a conversation versus sort of a solitary monologue?
Okay, let's pretend I'm dead. So when you read Shakespeare, when you read, let's say, Jane Austen, do you also feel that you're having a conversation with the writer?
Yeah.
So do I. Yeah, so do I. But the writer doesn't have to be there in person on the planet for you to have that conversation necessarily. Because what a text is it's a preserved score for voice. So when you're reading a text, you are playing the score the way a violinist plays a musical score, and your reading of that text is your interpretation of it. Just as when a violinist is playing a piece of music, that's the violinist's interpretation. But in order to even have an interpretation, you have to enter into conversation with it, as it were. Not so much with the composer or the author, but with the text or the score. So your conversation is actually with the book. And you don't need me to be there to have that conversation.
Thank you.
Did I understand correctly that when you were a student at Harvard, there was a library you couldn't go into because you were a girl?
When I was a student at Harvard, there was a library I couldn't go into because I was a girl. Yes, it was Lamont Library, and it was for male undergraduates, and it had all the modern poetry in it, and I was a poet. I could get those books if I knew what they were. I could get them out, but I couldn't go in there and see what they had. And this was before the internet. You couldn't go online and see what they had.
How can you express that so calmly?
Because I'm old. Yeah, so what happened was that you couldn't go in there, but for that reason I spent quite a lot of time in the stacks at Widener, which is the main library. And there was lots of things in there that I probably wouldn't have found if I'd been over there sucking up all the modern poetry out of Lamont Library. So in the stacks at Widener, some weird person had made a little collection of Canadian literature. And then they'd obviously died because they'd stopped at a certain year. But right beside it was the witchcraft and demonology. And that has been so useful to me. So there's a silver lining to every cloud. Just as there's a cloud to every silver lining. Yes, I love telling stories of the olden days. One of my fellow graduate students, female, almost got kicked out because she wore red petticoats, which the rim of which showed beneath the bottom of her skirt. Oh. Yes, the two of us once went to a graduate seminar which was being held in one of the houses, and the gatekeeper didn't want to let us in because I think he thought we were ladies of the night. Even though it was daytime. I mean, they wouldn't have thought that about me. I was respectably dressed in tweed. But my friend Ilsa was not only red petticoated, but red haired, and it was just too much.
Thank you. I'm actually glad to hear you mention poetry. I'm actually much more familiar with you as a poet than as a fiction writer. And I'm wondering if at some point you made a decision to focus more on the fiction that you have, or, is poetry dead? I don't know. I'm an aspiring poet myself.
No, not in the least. I've continued to publish poetry. You can see some of the most recent ones if you go onto a site called Wattpad.com and go onto my page. You will find a little suite of poems called Thriller Suite, which unbelievably has had some humongous number of readers of it because Wattpad is free. So one of the things that I work in is, number one, I work with the Griffin Poetry Prizes. I'm a trustee. And that's at sort of what you might call the high end. And then bringing poetry to young people, they have another program called Poetry and Voice, Les Voix de la Poésie, because it's Canada, so it's French and English. But you've got that here with the National Endowment for the Arts, run a poetry recitation contest for high school students, and that has been so popular you would not believe. So they give them a selection of poems that they can choose to memorize and then present, and they're very, very good at it. I've seen them in action. They're really great. Anyway, Wattpad is another way of making poetry accessible to young people, and judging from what goes on there, poetry usually is what young people begin writing. They usually begin with poetry. And then if they go on to write longer prose. But there's quite an astonishing amount of activity there, and I think part of it is just connecting people's passion with what other people have done, connecting with the tradition. And that's what the recital contests are good at doing. They were started in Canada by a guy, and you'll think this is pretty funny. He was from a large family of boys, and when they were naughty, which they were quite a lot, their punishment was that they had to memorize poetry. Now, you would think that would have turned him off, but it made him a lifelong devotee. And then he became rather rich, and put some of that towards setting up these poetry awards and poetry programs. So poetry is not dead.
Okay, thank you.
I'm so grateful you're a writer.
Well, thank you.
I've had various complicated eye things, so I haven't read as much as many people. But The Handmaid's Tale, I am so grateful for that book. I think it's just like a pattern for how people can learn about men and women and how they interact. It's so insightful. I had one comment only about, I did read many years ago something about your childhood growing up where you were not living door to door or house to house because I guess your father's occupation. And I wonder if you had any idea in mind that the fact that you weren't socialized the way we are and controlled in the same way that we are when we're rubbing elbows close to close in towns or villages or cities, to the extent that women are socialized and limited and directed and ordered and limited and directed and ordered. Yeah, and I wonder if that had much to do with it, because to me it was just like a pattern. You just wrote the whole thing down, and I think that's one of the best books in the whole world.
Wow. Well, thank you very much. But let's say a couple of things about that. Number one, a lot depends on the family. And for women, a lot depends on what kind of father they get. So if they have a pretty good father, they're not going to be, they're not going to have the kind of experience that you're talking about. And you know, people know that. I think the kind of father that my own mother had was a sort of Victorian, you know, sit up straight at the table, you have to eat everything on your plate. I'd horsewhip you if I had a horse, etc. So quite strict. But he thought he was lenient because his own father was stricter than that. So I think a lot of it has to do with parenting patterns and also what's socially acceptable. And sometimes parents tell their kids the things they tell them because they don't want them to be running into trouble and running into danger. So I was pretty lucky because I had pretty good parents, and also we were up in the woods. So if you wore a frilly party dress up there, you were going to get bitten to death by black flies and mosquitoes anyway, so just people didn't do it. No Vogue glamour evening gowns in the woods, which meant, of course, that I was fascinated by them. So I think it has to do partly with that, but it's not a question of all men being horrible and all women being wonderful. You know that. You know that some people have great dads and great moms, some people have great dads and horrible moms, some people have horrible dads and great moms, and there's just all different kinds.
Of course. Thank you so much.
I have two questions. The more important one is, could you speak a little bit more on Crake and his essence? Was he an engineer who saw a problem and solved it, regardless of the consequences? Does he represent patriarchy?
Crake. Does Crake represent patriarchy? No. Not.
Is he an engineer?
He's a bioengineer for sure. But I think he's also, remember, this is in the future. So unlike anything we have today, he sees the biosphere being depleted.
Okay. So he's solving a problem.
Well, how would you solve it? So I think this is one of the questions the book asks the readers.
It needs to be something drastic.
The Earth has a limited carrying capacity, and it also has a limited carrying capacity for carbon emissions. So number one, we need to get a different source of cheap energy. Number two, we need to address the limited carrying capacity of the Earth. So in the future, he obviously thinks that we have not solved that problem. You know, we today didn't solve it, so it's even worse in the future.
Okay. My other question was, what did you imagine Craker singing to be like?
What did I imagine Craker singing to be like? I had somebody singing in San Francisco. No, I had somebody singing in Minneapolis. And she had a guy playing with her who had one of those xylophones made of metal tubes, and he was playing it with a bow. He was playing some of those metal tubes with a bow, and that gave a pretty good idea. sort of quite eerie, very crystalline kind of singing.
Thank you.
Their vocal cords are different from ours. Let's put it that way.
That was my big question, yes.
What's the point of making new people if they can't have different vocal cords? That's it.
Mine's kind of a two-parter also, but it'll be quick. I've both read and listened to on audiobook all three of the stories. And have you listened to any of them?
I haven't listened to them all the way through, but I get to help pick the voices. And I know these actors because we actually worked with the one who plays Toby when we were doing our musical and dramatic presentations at the Year of the Flood, and they're all pretty good, don't you think? Yeah, I think the audiobooks are very well done.
Three. The second part is, I am always depressed when I come to the end of a really, really good book or series of books, and I want more. And this probably a yes or no. Do you think you're gonna write any more in the series?
I never predict the future.
Okay.
So, two more. Yes, this one and that one. Yes.
Super. I was enchanted by a blind assassin, and I remember an old essay you wrote called Spotty-Handed Villainesses, and you talked about the unlikable female narrator, how that shows how women are fully human. That's why all your female narrators can't be all sweetness and light, and I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit. Okay.
I mean, I'm very radical in that I believe women are human beings. So there's a plus to that and there's a minus. So if women are human beings, it means they're not angels. And if you went to grade school, you already know this because you were in grade 4. So you remember your nasty little girlfriends from those days. Yeah, so it does mean that they come in all different varieties, women do, just like men. And it also means that an individual, one of them, may have good days and bad days, and may get along with some people and not with others, and may be a freaking psychopath.
Or a murderer, right?
So I've always written across that spectrum. I did write a couple of stories. One man said to me once, well, there aren't any female con men. And I said, well, there are female con women. And because I read the newspapers, and you come across these stories about them. I think a number of them have been caught out running the cancer scam, collecting by saying they've got cancer and actually not having it. But I think my favorite was a woman who passed herself off as a male Portuguese general for years. The uniform, get herself collected every morning in a limousine. I don't know where she went. But the neighbors all thought that she was a Portuguese general. So yeah. It's like that.
Thank you so much.
So I thought that Lady Oracle was one of your most fun, kind of exciting books, but it left me really curious whether or not there might be a secret Margaret Atwood novel under a pseudonym in a tawdry genre out there somewhere.
Have I ever written under a pseudonym? Yes. Have I ever written a novel under a pseudonym? No. Shorter pieces. I got into this habit in college because they were so few people interested in the arts that we had to write the literary magazine under different names. But I also, I ran a comic strip under a different name for a while, and I also reviewed one of my own books under a pseudonym. And I cited a number of critics in my review, all of which were anagrams of my name. Like they were the well-known Croatian deconstructionist Trogwait de Morda. And I was a bit severe on myself, and people wrote letters to the newspaper saying, "How dare Trogwait de Morda criticize me?" And then I felt kind of mean. Anyway. So it is like that, yes. Good question. So thank you very much.